Hi guys, nice to talk to you. I'm in a cafe right now, so I hope that this is not too loud and that you can hear me. I wanted to talk a little bit about some other poetic devices, so let's just go into this really quick. Simile, comparison using like or as. Metaphor is a comparison without like or as. Okay? Literary irony, which you guys talked about with Luis Fonda's Los Vendidos, that you read this week. It's a little bit different depending on whether you're talking about fiction or poetry or plays, and so I'm going to talk about it in terms of poetry. Contrast of happy meter or sound with dark material, that can happen in a song as well, right? Songs and poems are very similar in terms of both lyrics and sound. Sylvia Plath's Daddy, which you guys already read, is a really great example of literary irony that's contrasting meter with content. It uses baby talk words like gobbledygook, sounds like the speaker might be a child, and set in a sing-song meter like tetrameter or pentameter, which if you remember is a 4-foot or 8-syllable or 5-foot or 10-syllable line. It sounds like a nursery rhyme. And it contrasts that with dark themes of hatred, pain, abuse, suicide. Or it can be irony as deployed within a piece, like in Los Vendidos that you read this week. Okay, and then verse poetry. We talked about this already. Verse forms have particular rules. Sonnets, villanelles, sestinas, haiku. I'm going to teach you a villanelle in the next video. They do not have to rhyme, but they follow the same form or scheme that all poets use when they're writing it, and they come from different countries all over the world. The Italian sonnet comes from Italy, and then the Elizabethan sonnet comes from England, also called the Shakespearean sonnet because he was the most defining writer who wrote Elizabethan sonnets during the Renaissance. Let's see, haiku obviously come from Japan, and so there's many forms from countries all over the world. Those are just some of the most well-known. Okay, so I'm going to talk about metaphor versus simile first. First, let's talk about Harlem by Langston Hughes. You guys read A Raisin in the Sun, the play, recently. Lorraine Hansberry actually took this poem and wrote that play based around it. So she's talking about the hopes and dreams of black people. He was writing during the Harlem Renaissance, which is 20s to 40s, but really the heyday was in the 30s. She was writing more like the 50s, which is the late 50s, early 60s, is the beginning of the end of the Jim Crow era, which we talked about, segregation, and the phenomenon of white flight and black people moving into white neighborhoods. Middle-class blacks moving into white neighborhoods and what happened with their white neighbors. So he's an earlier era poet, and she takes his poem almost as a challenge. So it's called Harlem. He asks, what happens... I hope that this cafe gives you some ambiance for this poetry lesson. So it's called Harlem, and it's also known as a dream deferred sometimes by some people. He starts with the question, what happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun? Or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat? Or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load. Or does it explode? So you can see he tries to keep it pretty metrical, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. He uses some use of end rhyme, sun, run, meet, sweet, load, explode. But this is obviously not a form, it's still free verse. This is really good poem for simile. This is all similes except for there maybe is one metaphor, because it doesn't use the word like or as. Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun? Simile. So he's saying, dream just kind of shrivel up and shrink and lose its life and juices and fester like a sore and then run. To me, this has implications of resentment and like anger that other people, and what is a sore? A sore like rotten meat as well stinks, right? Or is gross. And very visceral, and other people are repelled by it. So does it become such an open wound for people that it becomes a sore, an infected open wound that in a sense saps their life and health like an infected wound would? Or stink like rotten meat, does it repel other people with your anger and resentment? at not having achieved this dream. Crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet. These are all similes, right? To me, kind of seems like you find all kinds of rationalizations for why you never achieved that dream. And in your mind, oh, my life was better because I went down this other direction, and instead of like doing this thing I really wanted, I have more financial stability, or I have more, I have more money, or I know more people. I didn't travel much, so I know more people in my hometown. I have more connections. All kinds of ways of, but maybe your real dream was to travel or was to do this or that, and you didn't. And this is a way of sort of rationalizing, but like a syrupy sweet. But he's almost saying overly sweet, sort of sickly sweet. It's constantly having to maybe remind yourself of that. He also says crust and sugar over, which implies that it's not necessarily a comfortable kind of sweet. Maybe it just sags like a heavy load. Everybody knows somebody like this, right? Their shoulders kind of and head bowing down, like they're walking under a heavy load. The weight of life, the weight of being sort of ground down all the time by what life does to us, and working for others and not being able to do what we want to do. And then he says, or does it explode? And this is when you realize that this whole poem may actually be about the civil rights movement, and in that context, because we know that it did, this can mean so many things, because this is universal, this poem. Does it explode? Does it come out by being violent to others? Does it come out by intense anger that, is like a bomb going off in your environment? In this case, it exploded in the civil rights movement. It's an incredible upheaval for black rights, like Rosa Parks. You could say that, she in a sense kind of exploded by refusing to move from the back of the bus. There were also obviously the bombs that were placed in black churches during this time. So there were real explosions. There was Malcolm X, there was Martin Luther King. This came later, right? But the Harlem Renaissance really predated the beginning of the civil rights movement. And this could be said to be the only metaphor, because he says, or does it explode? Well, how can a dream explode, right? But it doesn't use like or as. If there were a second line, it might be a simile. Or does it explode like a bomb, right? Okay, so that's the difference between a simile and a metaphor. Okay, let's talk about verse poetry. This is a Shakespeare and Elizabethan sonnet. One of his most famous, Sonnet 18, Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough wings do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. I think that this is perfect. If you remember me teaching about meter, unstressed, stressed, unstressed, stressed, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. That is a line of perfect pentameter. 1, 2, that's 1 foot, 2 syllables. 2 syllables, so that's 2 feet, 4 syllables. 2 syllables, 3 feet. 2 syllables, 4 feet. 2 syllables, 5 feet. Perfect pentameter. Perfect iambic pentameter. If you remember, an iamb is unstressed, stressed, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. So some linguists talk about how different languages have different natural meters, and they say that pentameter is a natural meter of English. There's actually 3 forms of verse. There's free verse, formal verse, and blank verse. And between the Renaissance era and modern poetry, poets wrote in what's called blank verse, which was unrhymed iambic pentameter. Every line was 10 syllables, mostly unstressed, stressed, unless they're trying to call attention to something. Like here, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Shall I compare thee all stressed, which brings a lot of stress to this idea of comparing thee, right? So there's a reason, emphasis to that, those lines. So there's a reason that poets purposely alter that and are not using that. When you go back to the iambic pentameter, you can think of that as the default of the poem, and it's kind of sing-songy, and it lulls you into feeling like relaxed, like a song. That's like a natural feeling, and it's not trying to call attention to that line. Okay, so shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake. This is another perfect line of, unless you say stressed, spondee here, rough winds Depends on how you read it a bit, right? But do shake the darling buds of May is all perfect pentameter, unstressed, stressed. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his cold gold complexion dimmed, and every fair from fair sometimes decline by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou oust, nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade, when eternal lines the time thou growst. Okay, this is A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F. Where's the final two lines? So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this and gives this life to thee. E, F, E, F. Okay. And G, G. This is the rhyme scheme, okay? This is called an Elizabethan or Shakespearean sonnet. Day rhymes with May, temperate, especially in English would be with rhyming with date. Shines, declines, dimmed, untrimmed, fade, shade, owest, growest. And then the last two rhyme each other, see, the. And these are called couplets, so there are two rhyming lines each, right? Two, 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 and there are 14 lines of iambic pentameter doing exactly this rhyme scheme. A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, G, G. Okay, so let's look at the second one. My mistress' eyes are nothing like the sun. This is perfect. My mistress' eyes are nothing like the sun. Da 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 da. Perfect iambic pentameter. Coral is far more red than her lips red, bringing a lot of attention to coral, red, and her lips. If snow be white, why then her breasts are dun. If hairs be wires, black wires grow on her head. I have seen roses damasked red and white, but no such roses see I in her cheeks. And in some perfumes is there more delight than in the breath that from my mistress reeks. I love to hear her speak, yet well I know that music hath a far more pleasing sound. I grant I never saw a goddess go, my mistress when she walks treads on the ground. And yet, by heaven, I think my love as rare as any she belied with false compare. This poem is very funny. He loves her very much, but he's saying that she's not. So at the time, sonnets were very romantic, just like this. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate, right? That was the convention of the time, was to compare women to goddesses and the summer's day and to gold and etc., etc. Here he says, my mistress' eyes are nothing like the sun. Coral is more red than her lips red. If snow be white, well then her breasts are dun as a yellowish tan. If hairs be wires, black wires grow on her head. This is a metaphor, no like or as. I have seen roses damasked red and white, but no such roses see I in her cheeks. A metaphor, no like or as. And in some perfumes is there more delight than in the breath that from my mistress reeks. This could be arguably a simile or a metaphor. He's comparing, but there's no like or as. I love to hear her speak, yet well I know that music hath a far more pleasing sound. He's comparing, but he's saying her breath is not perfume, so I guess he's actually making an anti-metaphor there. Interesting. Another example of literary irony. He's subverting that poetic device. Her breath reeks. It is not perfume. People did not brush their teeth back then. That music hath a far more pleasing sound. I grant I never saw a goddess go. My mistress when she walks treads on the ground. She has a rough voice, wiry hairs, yellowish skin, normal colored lips. She's not a goddess. She walks on the ground. And yet, by heaven, I think my love as rare as any she belied with false compare. I love her more because I'm not pretending she's something she is not. I love her as a human being. That is literary irony, making fun of the convention of the era. Okay, C, D, C, D, A, B, C, D, E, F, E, F. It's about to end, so I'll continue on the next one with a different poem. And G, G, that is the Elizabethan sonnet. literary irony, similes, and metaphors, and talking about one particular rhyme scheme of the sonnet. Okay, see you next one.